Ooh, I love the art on your back walls there.
Yeah, this is, I'm in one of the conference rooms in my co-working space. I don't know what this art is.
Of course. Well, let's not talk about that art. Let's talk about your artwork. And I'm talking about the lovely and talented little Layla, who is now how many weeks old?
So she is 19 weeks old now.
Oh, you're kind of lapsing on Instagram. I'm looking at here.
I know. I've taken the photos. I just haven't posted them.
Well, for those nonfiction podcast listeners who are listening going, what are you guys talking about? I'm talking with Melanie Deziel about the most important thing in her life, which is the arrival of her brand new baby girl named Layla. And she is just lovely.
She's extremely cute. Yeah. And I've been trying to keep track and take a picture of her at each different week marker so I can track. She's getting big so fast. And it's wild how fast that happens. And I had been posting most of them, but I'm slacking a little bit. So Instagram will tell you she's 17 weeks old, but there's 2 more photos in the queue.
Wow. Well, you're doing a whole lot better than me because one of my daughters is going abroad for a semester in England for college. And I'm like, when did that happen? Literally, she was just this tiny little peanut a while ago. And now she's going overseas. And that's got me freaked out a little bit, but in a really good,
so fast.
Yeah. In a good, proud way. It seems like there's been a lot going on, and I want to talk to you about a post that I saw you do, and I don't know where it was because that's the problem with social media when you're doing so many different channels well, and you follow that person wherever they happen to be. Sometimes it's impossible to remember where you read this, but you did a decade wrap-up posting where you talked about at the beginning of this decade and then at the end of the decade. And it was like this wonderful little, portrait of your life in 10 years and the miles, literally millions of miles that you've come in that decade are incredible. I mean, it was really fun to read and get to know you better.
Yeah, it was on Twitter that I posted it. I had to use that character account. But yeah, I mean, I was reflecting back, and there's a lot of really trite things that were happening around, the new year and the new decade and all of that. And I was trying to be really thoughtful and think back, what have I achieved? How have I grown in this time? And that list was, I got my bachelor's degree, I got my master's degree, moved to New York, got my dream job at the New York Times, met the love of my life, started my business, managed to replace my corporate salary in that business, won a couple of awards, got married, spoke around the world, which is always a dream of mine, finished my book, and then we had Layla before the end of the year. So I was like, that was a solid 10 years. I don't know what the next 10, how they could possibly compete, but we'll see.
Well, and, me being the lame host of the Nonfiction Brand podcast, I got to find a way to turn that toward the central theme of the podcast and say, how much of that is possible only because you created a personal brand. You intentionally decided, hey, don't get me wrong. If you're working at the New York Times, to call you a drone working at the New York Times is not exactly the same thing. But still, you decided, hey, I could be this the rest of my career, or I could follow who I am and build what I really want to do. You kind of alluded to the fact that you wanted to speak internationally, and you have. I mean, are you I got to see it to be it, so you saw it and are it?
I think in many ways, I didn't know that this life that I'm now living was possible. I think a lot of the different steps in my life kind of took that path. I actually, when I started in college, I wasn't majoring in journalism because I didn't really know that was a thing. I knew that I enjoyed reading and writing, but at my high school, it was my English teacher who was the person sort of at the helm of all these things. So I thought, well, it must be English that I like. All the activities that I like doing in Miss Nagel's class, that's what I'm going to study. So yeah, it's very similar. I got to college, I saw what journalism was and who the journalism professors were and thought, wait, that's actually what I want to do. That seems like a lot of fun. And very similarly, when I was at the New York Times, a distant colleague, you could say, was unable to go to a conference they had been invited to speak at. And after a series of other people sort of turned down the opportunity or had a conflict or whatever else, I got nominated to sort of go in their spot. And they said, well, Melanie presents client meetings all the time. She talks to our clients. So surely we can trust her to represent our department, our company. And I got back from that and thought, that was the most fun I've ever had in my job. And it's not my job. So maybe I need to reevaluate. How do I do that more? How do I get on stages more? How do I teach and reach more people with what I love about storytelling. And so, yeah, it was very much, as soon as I got a little taste, I thought I need to find out how to make that the whole main meal.
This episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by Nonfiction Brandversity. It's a free Facebook group dedicated to the art and craft of personal branding, and we'd like to invite you. Just search Nonfiction Brandversity on Facebook and ask to join. You're in, guaranteed. I can't wait to see you on campus. If I remember correctly, and again, for long-time listeners to the Nonfiction Brand podcast and people who've actually read the book that Spencer X. Smith and I wrote, it's called Rotoma, the ROI of Social Media Top of Mind. I actually feature Melanie in the book because I discovered her through a podcast appearance on Grant Baldwin's Speaker Lab podcast. Mm-hmm. And you're actually talking about exactly what you just told us, kind of serendipitously being put into the speaker role. But my favorite little anecdote from that podcast was you sitting around talking to another speaker at one of these venues, and you discovered you get paid for this?
Yeah, it was. At that point, I was being sent by my company. So I was, getting my salary for going to do a more fun version of, what I would normally do in a client meeting and talk about what it is that we do. Yeah, and it was that to realize some of these folks are paid to be here. We're doing the same thing, but they're not with a company. They're being paid by this hosting organization. And that was the moment where I thought, well, maybe this is actually a job after all, instead of just part of a job. And I think what I've come to find is that it is still part of a job for me. It's just a job that I control. So I do a mix of speaking, consulting. I've taught college classes as an adjunct professor. I run a mastermind. I've just written a book. So it is still very much part of a whole mix, but it's a mix that I control now, as an entrepreneur, instead of hoping that a chain of people turn down an opportunity to speak and I get to take them up on it.
Well, and isn't that a key right there, that phrase that I get to control? Now, that's a double-sided coin that, I get to control it. And then on the other side is, oh my God, I got to control it, every aspect of it. And so when you talked about your menu of things you do, your mastermind, your book, your teaching, your speaking, all this stuff, you've really kind of got to do it all, because it's not like you're creating one thing that people want to buy and they buy it all over and over again. Now, again, that might change. For example, you and I both know speakers who've kind of planted their flag in one area with one topic and then can make 5 figures per speech, telling that same speech over and over and over again. I'm going to guess, based on what I know about you, you are not that person, nor do you want to be that person, because you've got too much going on in this gray matter up here. And you're constantly riffing and refining and developing and pushing forward. To do the same thing over and over again would be this Sisyphean task of, pushing the same speaking rock up the hill.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a balance. So one of the things that's really wonderful is I have tried to innovate and come up with new talks, every year and a half or so, just depending on when the market tells me it's time for something new and when I feel like it's time for something new. The talks that I've given for a long time, there is still demand for those in, events I haven't spoken at before, audiences who've never heard from me. I can sort of pull out this wonderful polished gem from my archives, and I know the content, I know it really well. And knowing it so well, knowing that I can deliver it, gives me a magnificent freedom to improv and play and have fun with it, which you can't always do when you're still working on mastering the delivery of the content itself, right? So I do love that I have these talks that are sort of mastered, in my holster that I can sort of pull out and use when needed. But I really like the excitement of coming up with something new. So I'm actually in the middle of that process now. The talk that I've been giving for the last, this one stretched to 2 years. I took a few months off from maternity leave. But, the talk that has been my most recent talk is just sort of reaching its general purpose expiry. It'll still be in the roster and come out every now and then, but it's time for something new to take the forefront. So working on coming up with that as we speak. It's an exciting and scary time, but you make a good point too about the sort of stress of having to control it, right? The stress that all these decisions are on you. And I think when your brand is really tied up in a business or a corporation or honestly just someone else who's really in control of what you do and how you spend your time, that can be stressful, but there's also a freedom in that. One of the things I found is when I went on maternity leave, we were just talking about the little one here, I don't get paid maternity leave. And it turns out that I should have, thought of that as a boss of only myself. I should have planned to give myself paid maternity leave, right? Obviously, there was planning involved in all of that, and things are fine. But, you don't have, when you are your own boss, the privilege of just sort of resting on your laurels and knowing that you've got sick days and time off and, all this infrastructure that's there to support you when you are sick or need time off. And now that I'm coming back to work after that, I've got to build it all up from scratch, largely by myself all over again. So there's these wonderful moments where you get to control it all. And then there's these moments where you're like, gosh, why did I elect to control it all, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, all that groundwork that you've laid over the years, over that past decade, it's not really you've laid groundwork. You've laid a runway or a raceway. A runway has an end, a raceway doesn't. I mean, you're literally going a little bit faster every single year because you've built a brand. In the past, you might say, well, Melanie's got a good reputation. Well, you've got more than that. You've got a good reputation, but you also have a brand as a speaker. And I guarantee you that I've not been in any conversations with bookers, but I can imagine how they go, which is, well, we need to have a speaker on this topic. And you go, Melanie Deziel? Yeah, I've heard of her. Oh, she's fantastic. Does she speak on this? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. If we ask her to, she'll do something fantastic because the quality of your talk is not based on the quality of your talk. It's the quality of your presentation, the quality of your thinking, the quality of your energy and verve and originality. So were I a booker of an event, by the way, if anybody listening to the Nonfiction Brand podcast is a booker, I absolutely recommend Melanie Deziel only if the people in your audience can stick with someone who's going at 60 miles an hour, because I've seen you start rolling and it's like, strap in, people. It's going to be a fantastically wonderful talk, but we are going to move and move quickly.
Yeah.
So anyway, your reputation is one thing, but it's your brand that truly precedes you into the room, into the discussion with anybody who might be thinking of booking you. It's like, do we need her to talk about content creation? No, I wonder if she has a fresh take on it. Have you ever gotten a call or an email query from someone who's booked you in the past saying, hey, we want to have you back, but we'd love you to talk about this, or we're kind of focusing on that. Could you craft what you said before towards this, or things like that?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I think every event has its own themes, its own needs. And a big part of any early booking conversation is trying to understand what are they trying to achieve with the event? Like, what are the goals of that event? And what are the key challenges of the audience, right? What are they showing up for to try to solve? What information are they looking for? And there's almost always a way to kind of marry those two things within my expertise, within the things that I can share. What you do have to be careful of as a speaker is not everyone understands your expertise and your value as much as you do, of course. And sometimes people want you, I've gotten people who come and say, hey, look, I've seen you on Instagram. You seem to do a great job. We're looking for an Instagram speaker. Could you come in and do that? Now, theoretically, I could come in, I could craft a whole presentation and I could talk about what I do on Instagram, but that's not my expertise. That's not really tightly related to my business objectives. And it's not something I want to necessarily build a reputation around, because if I do that talk, I may just get more inbound requests for Instagram talk, which are sort of not in keeping with, where my business lies, where my expertise lies. So you do have to occasionally, say, well, yes, I could in theory. And if it's really me that you're looking for, I'd love to talk about how I can bring my expertise and value to something related to that. But if it's specifically that you're looking for, here are 3 other speakers who really have branded themselves as Instagram experts, who probably have deeper insights in that area and are probably a better fit for that particular challenge you're trying to solve. It is always a balance, because it's very easy to get taken off track. People call it like the curse of the competent, right? You may be good at many things. It doesn't mean you should be doing all of those things all the time. It makes it difficult for you to focus on your real core values if you can get sort of pulled in different directions each time an opportunity arises.
Well, one of the things that, I often talk about and teach even is that having a brand means saying no more often than yes, because you truly know who you are and you want to be who you are. So you do exactly what Melanie's just talking about, which is, I could talk about that, but only if I am able to bring my best value to it. If you're looking for someone who knows all the tips and tricks of the Instagram algorithm, there are experts in the Instagram algorithm as it is in the past 15 minutes, they're up to date on that, but I'm guessing you're like me, which is I use Instagram, I enjoy Instagram, but I've never been under the hood of Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and for me, like, I think I actually have run Instagram for brands. So I have a little bit of that sort of marketing and business of Instagram sort of background, I guess. But yeah, it is tough to choose. This is a lane where I really want to focus my attention. And for me, a big part of it is also wanting to make sure that I'm making introductions and promoting other speakers who have those expertises that I don't, because I hope that they would do the same for me. I hope that if someone were an Instagram speaker and someone said, hey, are you talking about, do you do talks on content marketing and content idea generation? I would hope that they would see that same thing and say, well, this is really where my expertise is, but maybe Melanie would be a good fit for you. That happens to be her expertise. So it feels a little bit like feeding the ecosystem of making sure I'm pointing event organizers in the direction of speakers who are going to best serve their audience, and also pointing myself in the direction of audiences that I can best serve. It just feels like hopefully if we keep things even in that way, everything gets where it's supposed to be, and the audiences get the information they need to get.
Hey, nonfiction branders, did you know I wrote a book? Well, I did, and it's called Rotoma, the ROI of Social Media Top of Mind. I wrote it with my colleague Spencer X. Smith, and it's all about Rotoma, an acronym that means Return on Top of Mind Awareness. Best-selling author and NYU Stern School of Business professor Scott Galloway called it a book that starches the fluff from social media and helps managers allocate capital and find the unicorn among unicorns, ROI. And Chief Content Officer at Marketing Profs, Ann Handley said, this isn't just a practical way to think about the return on social media, it's also a spot-on, accurate way to reframe your social efforts. Check out all the 5-star reviews on Amazon by searching Rotoma, Rotoma. Pick up your copy today and start building your personal, professional, and small business brand the Rotoma way. You have clearly decided the lane or the niche that you want to exist in.
Yeah.
The thing that I like about what I've seen you do is that you don't go for the temporary or the ephemeral. You look for the classic, the always true, the evergreen thing about it. Like I'll call a lot of what you're talking about kind of first principles, because yeah, we can all talk about what's the best time to post on XYZ. All that changes from in less than a lifespan of a fruit fly. But things that don't change are things like the power of story or the types of stories that people engage with. In the second half of this conversation, we're going to talk about the book you have coming out. Mm-hmm. But I really want to focus right now on Melanie Deziel. Why did you choose that lane that you're in and plant your flag in a big, big way? So much so that you're turning away business.
It's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it because it gives me a chance to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and share a little bit of maybe my business strategy that I don't always get to talk about publicly. So when I started out, I spoke exclusively about native advertising, and that's a very niche down version of what I do now. So that is specifically when, and I think we've talked about this maybe in a previous interview together, specifically when a brand goes to a publisher like the New York Times and wants their help to co-create branded content. So that was my expertise. I spoke exclusively about how brands could work with publishers to co-create content together. That was very, very specific. It appealed to a limited audience, and I learned that pretty quickly. So what I did from there is after about 6 months to a year of speaking almost exclusively on native, I branched out and said, well, I'm going to become a general content speaker because the best practices that I'm applying here in this realm of native advertising actually apply no matter where that content lives. This applies to your blog. It applies to your Instagram. It doesn't really matter whether it's native or not. These same best practices apply to any sort of brand content. So I branched out and then for about a year spoke broadly about branding content. And I had to make that transition smooth enough that people didn't feel sort of a whiplash, like I had changed my expertise, but really that I was slowly broadening it. And then more recently, what I've realized is the value in that I bring and what people tell me the value that I bring is that I'm helping them think about content differently. So I've now broadened it again to say, this is how I think about content, and I can teach you ways to think about content differently as well. So it has been this sort of, my goal was really, I started, and those of you who don't have a visual, right? I'm creating sort of a funnel with my hands. I started at the very pointed bottom of that funnel and was speaking only about native. I broadened that funnel a little bit to brand content no matter where it lives. And now I've broadened it out to sort of content methodology. How do you think about content? How do you implement content? How do you create strategy around content? It's really about the way of thinking and not what it used to be, which is a very specific single way of bringing it to life. So it is part of a strategy to kind of pick a lane that is broad enough that it has staying power, like you were talking about before. But it took me a little while to sort of, evolve and get to that point. And I feel like very comfortable that I've landed in the right lane, which is this is how we think about content and how you can think about content to use it successfully.
Yeah, a word I like to use a lot is calibration, which is you calibrate. It's not like you're suddenly going north and then you decide to go west. You're going north and all of a sudden the marketplace is telling you, hey, we'd love you to be a little bit more northwest. Can you do that? And you just kind of take that wheel and move it 1-2 degrees. And all of a sudden you're significantly moving over into a slightly different direction, but you're doing it while maintaining your overall direction based on who you are, what you do, and how you do it, your best value, so that you can actually provide that best value to the people booking you, to the client who's hiring you for consulting services and everything else. And the interesting thing is I've known you long enough or followed you long enough to remember the days when you were native advertising all day long. And for people who may not really understand what native advertising is, this podcast is probably going to air in March in coincidence with your book release, which we'll talk about in the next episode of this podcast. However, this past week, we had a great illustration of what native advertising is and should not be in the form of Facebook and Condé Nast publications, where there was this Puff article about women of Facebook, or it featured women in Facebook talking about how Facebook is safeguarding the 2020 elections, and people are going, to start with. And then all of a sudden, 1 minute later, there's a sponsored content thing on it. Yeah. And then 1 minute after that, it's gone. And that's just an example of how native advertising can go wrong in a big, big way very, very quickly. And I would love to have a whole half-hour conversation about that imbroglio with you, but it sounds like you're moving out of that area, not the least because it's an area fraught with peril and a very small audience relatively to the much broader audience. So if you were a marketing specialist for a foundry, people who pour iron to create whatever, you need to create content. You should talk to Melanie Deziel because she can help you figure out ways to make really cool, interesting content for your iron foundry. Can you do that? Yeah. Yes, you can very easily. And by the way, I happen to know someone who created a framework for coming up with those content ideas. And her name is Melanie Deziel. Let me spell that for you. It's Deziel, Melanie Deziel. And your website is storyfuel.co. Is that the best place for people to go to kind of link with you, get to know you better?
Yeah, absolutely. Storyfuel.co, you'll find everything you need. If it's info about speaking, about the book, if you want to contact me, all my social links are there. That is sort of like the central hub of any questions you may have or any ways you want to get in touch.
I only invite people on the Nonfiction Brand podcast who I personally endorse, bless, and think are fantastic at what they do. And Melanie is certainly that. We met accidentally, because I listened to a podcast. She sees me coming at her, Melanie, and I look like a Sasquatch about to envelop her in a hug. And she was gracious enough to figure out that I'm not some kind of weirdo, although I might be. But we've since become friends via the incredible power of social media and shared interest. And I would like to say, because you are truly living your brand in the way you present, in the way you share, and in the way you engage with people. So
I'm trying,
yeah, well, exactly. So anyway, what do you have going on? Okay, we're going to talk about the book in the next episode. What else is going on in Deziel world right now?
Well, I'm getting ready for social media marketing world, which is where I think we last saw each other, right? So I'm gearing up for that. That happens just the end of February, beginning of March. So that's sort of like my next big event that I'm gearing up for. Really excited about that.
Are you speaking?
I am. Yeah, I'll be speaking there.
What is the topic of your talk?
The topic this year is going to be about how to repurpose your content. So how to take content and turn it into other forms of content to sort of get the most bang for your buck.
Okay, well, anybody who's listening to this who might be going to social media marketing world, which, by the way, I am, so I'll see you there. I have to warn you, Do not arrive to Melanie's talk late because the place is going to be packed. I literally got there 5 minutes after she started and couldn't get in until about 15 minutes because someone had to leave the room before they would let anyone else in the room. So she's popular not just because she's a beautiful lady, not just because she's got really great ideas, not just because she's a fantastic presenter, but she's also a fantastic person. And I'm really thrilled to have you on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. So once again, stay tuned next week because we're going to be talking about her brand new book, which is called
The Content Fuel Framework, How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas.
Ooh, doesn't that sound exciting? Yes, it does, especially if you've got to come up with those story ideas. So you're not going to want to miss next week's episode, so I hope you'll listen in. Right now, for the Nonfiction Brand Podcast and Nonfiction Brandversity, I'm DP Knudten, and she is
Melanie Deziel.
And we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.